it's one thing, like, okay, fine, maybe you're sort of processing your hurt and your pain through a creative outlet, and that's great. But like once you heal, it shouldn't be like you heal and then you stop being an artist because you're healed now. It's like, no, like those gifts are still there.
So we're both excited about this episode.
Yes. We are a lot of stereotypes in this episode. A lot of, assumptions about creativity in this episode. So it'll be good.
And tell us what this episode is about.
This episode is about the creative process, but applying that to the larger context of your whole life. So essentially creating a creative lifestyle. Think of that as sort of the end goal or end project. This is more so about your mindset and about really just your day-to-day that you need in order to carry out creativity on a regular basis.
Yeah, this is about like, how do you become the artist? How do you become someone who creates on a regular basis, and not only on a regular basis, but on a healthy basis, where you're not burnout or you're not creating to like prove something.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about what is the definition of creative health.
Creative health. Just gonna keep saying it.
Well, health is the state of being free from illness.
Mm-hmm.
So that's health.
Mm-hmm.
Creative health.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, creativity should really flow out of a place of freedom and of play, and it's incredibly difficult to do that if you have something going on in your life that is inhibiting you in some way. So whether that's, grief or trauma or something, or fear, especially over a long period of time, thinking that that's your personality, but it's like, no, like you can have freedom in those areas. You don't have to be in bondage so that you can have that freedom, so that you can have a clear mind and have intentionality, walk in vulnerability constantly, because creativity requires vulnerability, and that requires courage, having community, being in constant prayer, having more of an identity. I think that's a part of like just mental health in general.
What do you mean by having an identity?
Like just knowing,
having your identity rooted in God.
Yeah, having your identity rooted in God and not in
your artwork.
Not in your artwork, or even like fleeting success. How we can sometimes measure success by silly things like money or status. Like our identity shouldn't be in those either, and that can be something that definitely affects how we create.
Clout.
Yeah, clout. So it's very much about the story you're telling yourself about the world, about yourself, about God, and how you operate in that on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. This is something I was saying in several other episodes. Like, creative health is not looking at creativity as like a means to fulfillment, but as a teacher, as a healer, really, and looking at it as a journey with your creator, and allowing that process to teach you things and inform the way you live and help you grow, heal, process, express. So creativity is a tool, it's a vessel in that sense.
Yeah. That
channels what God is saying into something beautiful.
Yeah.
That we can enjoy on earth. And that is a healthy outlook of creativity.
Yeah. And because because we're talking about in such a macro sense, this is not an overnight thing. This takes intentionality over years to really develop the kind of life that is necessary. Like I was saying in the other episode, living and breathing, being creative. Mm-hmm. This is not something you like make a plan for and then in a week, like you're there. Like that's not really realistic.
Yeah.
So, patience is key.
Yeah, so operating out of a creative place, to give you some adjectives, it looks like curiosity, It looks like peace, calm, not rushing or pressure to create, like for clout or to post something on Instagram or to even make a living. But like, I call it like beginner's mind. Like looking at it like from the mind of like a child, like that childlike faith. It looks like being inquisitive. It looks like being in tune with your interests and pursuing your interests. And being in tune with, it's more about not over concerning yourself too early with like the end goal, but really be more concerned about listening to your creative urges, which is the Holy Spirit. If you're, if you're grounded in Him.
Yeah. So, yeah, we touched on this on the
process.
The process episode. Listening really captures a lot of it because, in inspiration and in ideation and in implementation, all of those modes will come with doubts, will come with distractions, will come with competing ideas of what is, what you might think is a good idea, you know what I mean? And so you have to be prayerful throughout that whole thing. You have to be listening to what your environment is, what's happening in your environment, and the audience that you're serving, listening to your own experiences and what you resonate with. I think I started to say this to myself after seeing these little design process cards from IDEO, that same company I mentioned before. And it's just like a deck of cards to get your brain thinking about the design process differently. But it says something to the effect of, how would your frame of mind change if you thought about your process instead of as laying bricks, but instead thinking of it as watering a garden? And I think that's a perfect analogy because life is so complex and we're constantly being thrown new things that we really can't be too formulaic about anything, and when it comes to plants, like you actually do need to assess it and like sort of listen to it and see what's going on with it. And the weather's unpredictable.
See what it needs.
Yeah, see what it needs versus laying bricks is like it's just like 1, 2, 3. Like it's extremely, like, it's pretty straightforward, but not everything, like very few things are that simple. So the idea of listening, especially when it comes to the Holy Spirit, has kind of, for me, captured a lot of my whole mindset when it comes to creativity and just in general in life. But to make it kind of simple, we will kind of cover these modes again in like under the same heading. So like inspiration,
ideation,
and then implementation, so that it connects to what we were talking about in the process episode.
Yeah, but from a more macro sense, like how do you approach the inspiration mode from a mentally, spiritually, emotionally healthy place? How do you approach ideating through that? How do you approach the editing phase through that? Practically, how you create a lifestyle that facilitates those modes.
Yeah. Inspiration.
So what are the hang-ups that you can have while you're in the inspiration phase if you're not healthy?
There's a lot of things. I think being too isolated, like staying in your bubble and kind of just being on autopilot, like that, there's no room for inspiration there because there's not even any intentionality to just observe what's going on. Overthinking is a big one, because you're probably like constantly doubting not practicing mindfulness, and you're not like, it's kind of like the sort of early editing, but in just in life.
You're controlling the process too much.
And then a big one for me is, I think romanticizing. Like, I think it's good to take curiosity in things and wonder about things and celebrate them, while remaining grounded, But I feel like I used to be a lot more just like head in the clouds kind of person. And that, while you can still be inspired in that mindset, it sets you on a path for just having an out of touch approach to life in general and in your creativity. You know what I mean? If you're not grounded, if you don't actually know what's going on, and don't actually ask questions, and get different perspectives on things. So, yeah, getting out of your bubble kind of, I feel like, summarizes a lot of things that I mentioned. Getting out of your head.
You have an example of that?
So my last year of high school, senior year, I took AP art, which was like the worst. I was not doing well. I was very much too consumed with just the idea of making something cool and making cool paintings. But also I just had a lot going on. I was thinking about college. I was thinking about moving to New York. I was like, I had like a little summer fling, like like just my own creative voice was the last thing on my mind. And that showed in my work. Like, my painting teacher did not hold back with his critique. He'd be like, this makes no sense. Like, all these things are all over the place. This isn't coming together as a body of work. Like, he would say that over and over. This isn't a body of work. And I'm also like 17. So I'm like, what does it even mean, dude? Like, I felt like he was being pretentious. But at the time, it's like I'm 17, but now I can appreciate it. I didn't have a body of work. I was kind of like being too literal and couldn't get deep into my own inspiration in the actual project because I didn't have any real conviction for it, or convictions, deep convictions in my larger life. You know what I mean? I was just like, I'm just trying to go to college and start that, and not really thinking about who I am as an artist yet. You know what another example would be? This isn't my example, but I've heard people, like, when speaking to people, and they'll say something like, oh, I have an idea for a film, and the plot of the film is so wildly niche and specific, which isn't anything wrong with that, but as they're telling it, you can kind of see that, like, they're locked into their own perspective, because it is so, like, unrelatable, even in them just telling a synopsis of it. I don't know if you've had that happen, but I feel like that's a good example of someone who probably is maybe too isolated, or maybe around too many people that are too similar to them, because they lack that context, to have a fuller plate of inspiration to work from, like, just in life. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so how do you facilitate having a creatively, a healthy outlook of the inspiration phase? For me, it just starts with a buzzword like self-care, but if I'm not, like, talking to God, meditating, taking care of my health, eating right, I like to do yoga, stretch my body. A lot of people, it's like running or hiking, but, like, find those things that help you stay in a place of centeredness, like where you're centered. Your mind isn't racing 1,000 miles a minute.
Yeah.
A lot of times you do have a 9-to-5 job. It's like you have to, like, take time, wind down, take time to, like, have a morning jog.
Yeah.
Do a dance session, have some time to unwind, journal. And that's gonna, like, help you hear from him and be inspired, because, like I mentioned before, if you're just in the rat race of life, that's just going to put you in survival mode and autopilot mode. So you miss out on feeling inspired.
Yeah.
or being inspired. And that's like the first part of the process.
Yeah, I think for me, just having a commitment to learning and trying new things is super important, because I need to like stimulate my brain enough to, again, just get fresh perspective on things and
see connections.
Yeah, see different connections that I wouldn't otherwise see. And also journaling is super important, because ideas are always coming, but if I don't take the time to actually write them down, I'm not going to always remember, and I'll be frustrated when it actually is time to like sit down and I want to make something, and I'm like, what was all like those 50 things I thought of earlier this week, and just gone. I feel like, coming from fashion school, I've heard people say like being a fashion designer or like a trend forecaster or something, like you have to have to have a nose for a lot of different things, like culturally, like what's going on in the world, in the news, and politically, and in music, and cinema, because fashion is not just about clothing. It's a pulse of history right now, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that can apply to any sort of medium, whether that's film or something.
Especially the tech space, you see that a lot.
Exactly. And so it's like, when you have a pulse for what's happening right now in culture, you're able to better speak to the world when you make things, you know what I mean? If people resonate with that more, because you're actually in touch with what's happening. So yeah, just staying abreast of like generally what's going on. I don't have to be watching the news every single day, but I should be able to like know the general feelings of my age group and my country and my ethnic group, and you know what I mean,
being an observer.
Like, yeah, being an observer,
being centered,
being empathetic,
but also having your voice and like what's your perspective on that.
Yeah. Have you ever felt like artists need to have a little bit of crazy or a little bit of drama to be inspired?
There's what I think is a myth that a lot of people do believe, like artists have to suffer in order to create. And like I saw literally like an old art teacher from from college, like a drawing teacher. He was like, can a healthy person create great art?
Yeah.
And a lot of people were like, doubt it or whatever, and he was just like, honestly, yeah, doubt it. It would probably be pretty boring.
That's really sad.
It'll probably be boring art.
Yeah.
And yeah, he's kind of nihilistic, but that's a lot of people's perspective. It's just like, I mean, a lot of us, especially a lot of artists, are hypersensitive. So a lot of us have experienced some sort of trauma, but like it's a difference between carrying that and being like the suffering artist versus being someone who's healed and like trying, like, okay, how can I take what I've been through and create something that helps people who've been in this situation, versus just kind of beating that bush and all of my art just being about that.
Honestly, when I hear that, I feel like it's a reflection of people not experiencing the joy of Christ, because I understand that like sometimes sadness feels like such a way more memorable feeling and emotion than happiness. And so like a lot of people write these really beautiful poems and songs out of their sadness and stuff, and it is beautiful, but if that's the only way you can write songs, like that's not sustainable for your mental health.
And it's like, you need to check in with yourself. Like maybe you should be going to therapy. Like what is because like there's seasons of life, so I think your art should be reflective of that transparency of what you're going through. So some of your art might be that vulnerable, purging, kind of cathartic process that is super healing, and that's still going to help someone because people are going to resonate with that. But if that's like every season in your life is the same season of pain, it's like that's not healthy. That's not of God. Yeah,
like you shouldn't have to suffer to make stuff. And I genuinely believe that creativity is made to worship, you know what I mean? I mean, we're made to worship God as his image bearers. So it's one thing like, okay, fine, maybe you're sort of processing your hurt and your pain through a creative outlet, and that's great. But like once you heal, it shouldn't be like you heal and then you stop being an artist because you're healed now. It's like, no, like those gifts are still there, but you need a new source, and God is our source. You know, He's life-giving, and we can have far more joy and sort of a deeper experience with God, because He's an endless well, than any amount of sadness or trauma or anything like that, you know?
Yeah, creating from a healthy place, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's another conversation. Like there isn't enough healthy artists out there who like that people know about. And then when you're talking about Christian art is seen as second rate because honestly it's not as a lot of it isn't like, I don't want to say Christian art, but art made by you know, spirit-led people who are like healthy mentally, spiritually, and emotionally.
Yeah.
Like maybe they've been through seasons of pain and like they create that too, but it's not all just downhill.
Yeah.
You don't see a lot of, I feel like we're seeing more and more, but yeah, there's not enough of it.
Yeah.
It's more of like this suffering or traumatized artist that you see.
Yeah.
And like even the like in music, like the content of what is being sung about.
Yeah.
But that's another
yeah, that's a whole other discussion. Ideating. Real quick, I just want to like explain like what does that mean when it comes to your life, because it's like like you're not, it's not like in a project where you're, you know, coming up with a bunch of drawings or beats or something. It's not like that, obviously. I think in life it's about getting more and closer to God and that oneness with God, and being able to play in life in general, you know, and process your life, process your emotions, process what's happening.
Yeah, I didn't write about it from that perspective. I wrote about it from like what habits are you doing like in your life to help you with these phases? Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
versus making an analogy of ideating in real life.
Yeah, I just wanted to like bring it home, because if you kind of pose the goal of this process as creating a life where you can be creative more often, I see ideating as, like you saying, like those lifestyle practices, which you're probably not going to get right immediately. You know what I mean? Like it takes trial and error. It takes trying. It takes also just listening to what your life needs and trying different things and adjusting. You know what I mean? So I think, does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. The ideating is, I guess, the overall journey. Like, because in the art, like in your project, the process, ideating is like the doing, when you're finally sketching, you're finally draping, you're finally making beats or whatever. After you're inspired and you're like doing the busting out like the iterations of the project. Yeah. So in life, that looks like maybe you have several years where you're in a design role, and then maybe you want to learn something else. You want to learn the ukulele or something. But it's like the ideating is like kind of like the unfolding of life. I think feelings that let you know you're in this stage or in this mode is definitely faith, like abundance, seeing boundless opportunities, like you said, being playful.
Yeah, I think when you start to find yourself being more comfortable with vulnerability and open to community more, you know, that is healthy, and that is sort of that is being abundant, you know what I mean? I think also just like sometimes creating for creation's sake, you know, not making like some goal or project. Like I do that a lot with my painting where I'm not really focused on, you know, a body of work or something or making something cool for Instagram. It's just like I just care about the process and how I'm healing and how I feel when I paint, especially because it's like abstract. And I think that is a form of play too, because it's like this is like literally just this is just me and God. Like this isn't about anything else, and that's very pure. And when you're working out of that pure place, I feel like that's another sign that you're probably in that mode.
I think a good way to sum it up is also a commitment to discovery. Like you always talk about Donald Glover and how he says he believes in endings. Like when he was supposed to stop producing music the first time, even though like he produced like 2 projects since then.
Yeah.
And how he's allowed himself to delve in and like fully devote himself to acting, like on Community and screenwriting, and then like music, and then producing a show, and all the other various things he's done. Like allowing his life to like different seasons to look different. Like you might have a season where you're doing one medium, a season where you're doing something else.
Yeah.
And for me, I started off fashion, graduated in that design. But now I'm doing more writing, also some dancing.
Yeah.
Now I'm doing this. Never saw myself doing a podcast. I'm also interested in like doing art therapy and counseling, as I said in other episodes. So it's like, the difference is like knowing your motive. Like for me, it's like I had a one track. I kind of had a very linear way I was going to go about life, but God's allowed me to have different seasons where I'm using different gifts. So like, there's just been iterations of my own gifts and just like an unfolding of like gifts that I didn't realize were there, or gifts that I like previously just missed when I was younger. And so that ideating of life.
Yeah, I think we're saying the same thing, but on 2 different scales. Because you're saying it kind of in like the large scale, like if you look over the course of 20 years, have I allowed myself to explore and play? And I'm kind of saying it on the day-to-day level, like, do you let your mind wander? Do you get into the flow? Are you open to new things? Like, you know, just day-to-day or whatever. Because I think if you kind of look at an unhealthy mode of ideating your life would be being too rigid, you know, and that's bad, you know, either way, in both of the ways that we're saying that. When you're too rigid and you're not open, you know, for example, if you were to stay on that fashion track, you would never even know that you love writing and stuff like that. You would never even know that you have a passion for art therapy and mental health, you know what I mean? So you can't be too rigid. Being open, you know, again, back to listening.
Yeah, and I love bringing up Donald Glover again. One of his old interviews, they were like, he was kind of nervous when he left Community, like to pursue like Childish Gambino, like his music. And he was like, I think when the producer asked him like the reason, he was just like, honestly, like, my heart's not in this. And I even though like that's so simple, it's just like, and I resonate with that. It's like, how often do people just stop something because like their heart isn't in it? Like usually like that's dismissed.
Yeah.
It's like people do a lot of things that their heart isn't in for like the bottom line to pay bills.
Yeah, it's really a lack of owning your own. Yeah, just owning your own emotions toward things and your feelings toward things. Because
being sensitive to that.
Yeah, if you don't acknowledge that, how can you move forward? You're going to keep operating on that autopilot and keep just doing what you know and never taking that leap.
And you get more disconnected from yourself. And that's how so many people have like midlife crisis and they're like 40 or 50 and they're like, what did I do with my life? Because you weren't listening to your spirit, you weren't listening to your heart. Yeah, and sometimes that's just also a lack of prayer, because it is genuinely hard to like confront our own feelings sometimes, because that change is scary. But it's like at the same time, if you're being called somewhere else, you gotta be obedient, you gotta move. And when you keep, it's like a build-up, like when you keep making decisions out of like either fear or practicality, described as fear, and you're ignoring like your heart or your spirit talking to you, being like, oh, actually I want to try something new, because you're scared to take a risk. It's like the more you disconnect yourself from yourself, and the more out of tune you are with hearing. I believe when you hear yourself, like you're hearing Holy Spirit in yourself, like Holy Spirit speaking to you. So it's harder to hear that small voice that's trying to guide you into freedom, into like an abundant life, abundant, full life. That's limitless, a limitless life. And like he's a great example of that, like creatively. And I think on the practical sense, like if you looked at the process episode, we were like a hang up or a challenge with ideating is like the burnout, because you've got the inspiration, you have all of these ideas, and it's like a flood, and it's like you really have to just kind of allow yourself to not hold back. But it's very energy inducing, because this is when you're actually doing. It's a lot of mental energy, it's a lot of physical energy. So what do you do to unwind? Kind of going back to what we said in the first phase, like resting, having balance, eating well, having a healthy sleeping pattern. That will help you while you're in the ideating phase, it will help you avoid burnout.
Okay, so I wanted to ask, so let's say someone's listening and they're like, okay, they're vibing with all of this, but it's also their job to be creative, you know? And so it's a little bit different because there's that stress put on there, but maybe, you know, their life isn't as balanced as what we're talking about. You know, it's not as intentional yet, or, you know, they're on that path, but it's still early in the early stages of it. How do we kind of separate, you know, this more, how do you bring that into the workforce? You know what I mean? Where it's under a lot more stress and a lot more boundaries and typically collaborative, you know what I mean?
I mean, it's really listening. Like you can invite God into that, and we spoke on this on the other episode too. Getting proper sleep, getting proper rest, so you can be in touch with how God's leading you. Asking for help, asking others for help. Humility literally means like dependence on God, and it also manifests as like, you know, trusting other people, delegating things, telling people what your strengths are, maybe what your weaknesses are, what they can help with. And it's also, back to knowing your strengths. It's like, how do you do your best work? How do you do your best thinking? Is a big one for me. Do you think better with people? Do you think better alone and then bouncing ideas off of people after that? And like advocating for yourself, advocating for what you need, even in the work environment, as much as you can. So there are limitations, but as much as you can. But it really just comes to trusting God. He's faithful to give you, even if it's like at the midnight hour, like when you're presenting a pitch, or when you have to like present some ideas to your boss, or like whoever it is, your client. He's faithful. And expecting him to show up in your day-to-day, whether it's your job or it's your own project. But definitely not burnout. Not like a lot of us easily default to like working more to perform better. But it's like that's I feel like that's such an animalistic approach to getting better. But that still small voice from the Holy Spirit is not just to tell you what to do, but also to tell you who you are. And as you kind of practice more intentionality in your life, you'll start to recognize what's working for you, what's not working. And even once you do find what's working, you're not like held hostage to it. You're allowed to keep changing as a person. You need to keep changing as a person and keep growing. So like I'm reading this book called The Art of Slow Writing. So it's about writers' processes. And even if they're talking about one writer, like, and they wrote like 4 novels, each novel might have been a totally different process. So it's like, sometimes the process does change. So being committed to discovery, like I said before, and committed to, like, open to evolution.
implementation in the creative process is about that editing and that curating. So applying that to your entire lifestyle, I see it as like sort of getting nitty gritty in the details, you know? So like time management, like you said, routine, exercise, like eating correctly, like just all those different sectors, and, you know, just tweaking as needed. There's a lot of different like facets of health in general, like when you include physical health and mental health, and spiritual health. I think the biggest thing for me though is probably time boundaries. Like when my sleep schedule is wrecked, like I don't want to be creative. I don't want to do anything when my sleep schedule is bad. I don't want to create. I'm not inspired. I'm just thinking about sleep all the time and trying to catch up. I'm like in this time debt. That's probably the biggest thing for me.
Yeah.
Or always being in that mindset of like I'm only gonna create when I have time. It's just like at some point you have to just make the time. Like you just have to make it sacred and honor that and respect it, or you know what I mean, or it's not gonna happen. We talked about that in our in our like 9 to 5 workforce episode.
Yeah, and also I think, as we said in the process episode, that correlates with this one, like in the implementation or the elaboration or the fine-tuning phase of the creative process, the hang-up is like kind of can be rushing and just editing too quickly, because it's like you just burnt out from like the ideating phase, like actually creating the thing. So that's why a lot of these apply the same principles, like building in rest into your lifestyle.
Yeah. What would you say to somebody who says, yeah, but I work well under pressure? Like, is that good? Is that bad? Why or why not?
I don't think under pressure is like inherently bad. Like for example, sometimes creativity flourishes, a lot of times it does, in like limitations, like oh, I don't have like an exorbitant budget. I don't have 3 months to work on this. Maybe I have like 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And that can like, you're forced to like X things out because of time constraint, money constraint. So it makes you be more resourceful. There's been times I've worked under pressure, but it's made me like be more effective with my time. So I spent less time on it. Yeah. But it was still excellent versus like if I had so much time. So there is such thing as like creating urgency if you know that's what you need in order to like work effective. I think that's another way to say work under pressure, like creating urgency. Especially like if you're like a startup entrepreneur, you have to create urgency because there's really you're the force behind it.
Yeah.
It's like either you're gonna do it. No one really cares if you don't do it. It's your project. So I don't think that's like, a lot of people say that like it's a connotation, but I don't think it's inherently bad. But if you're working under pressure to the point where you're never sleeping, you're working under pressure like every day to the point where like you don't sleep, you're anxious. It's like, it's, again, we mentioned in another episode, like identify the fruits of the spirit. Are you working from patience, joy, peace, love? Is it like long suffering? Are you rushing? Are you just, flustered all the time? Yeah. Then that's not a healthy pressure. Like I do think there can be like a healthy pressure and a toxic pressure. Yeah. So just identifying the fruit of like what you're experiencing, what you're feeling when you say like, oh, I work better under pressure. Like, what does that mean for you? Yeah,
that makes me think of that one job I had. I'm not gonna say it, but that first job where it was like 400 prints a day, or sometimes it'd be like, when you guys get back from lunch, like literally tell us at lunch, and by the time we get back from the lunch, they'll be like, okay, have a whole new way of making patterns, and it's like, can I have lunch and not be thinking about work for 30 minutes?
Yeah, that's toxic.
Yeah.
But being like, hey, I need to start this book. A lot of creatives are type Bs. A lot of creatives are not the most expedient people. Like that's what I've seen. And like I'm like that. It's like if I know I have time, I'm gonna like spread that time out. But it's like, oh, I gotta get the forward of this book done to like pitch it to like someone or whatever, because I want a publishing house to help me edit it or something. than being like, maybe, oh, like, I'm going to give myself 2 weeks to get this done.
Yeah.
Like, that's a healthy pressure. That is necessary for you to get the thing done versus like...
Yeah. Yeah, there is such thing as good stress.
Yeah.
And that's what you're saying.
Yeah. But if you're like, say, like, if you're in another stage, like you're already an established writer, or like you're already an established entrepreneur, and you have a lot of clients coming in, and you're doing everything at the last minute in the name of, oh, I work better under pressure, then like that's not wise. That's not prudent, you know?
Or sustainable.
Yeah. And like you're never getting any sleep, and like that's ridiculous.
Yeah, that's different.
So it depends on what you mean by that.
I really like creating rhythms for myself, because kind of like how you're saying type B personality, like I feel like a lot of creatives are definitely sort of atypical in the sense of how they run their life. Like for example, like a lot of people relate to being a night owl, you know, and it's just like, okay, so maybe you can do that, but then build your life around that so that you're not trying to force yourself into being, like literally force your body into doing something it doesn't naturally do.
Yeah, you can still get proper sleep and be a night
owl.
It's
just like, you know, situate your life around that. Or it's kind of like, you know, when I sent you that video about the girl who, she's an entrepreneur and she runs her team around her menstrual cycle. I mean, luckily her whole team is women. But I think that's actually really smart, because it's just like, if you know you're going to have really low energy, it's just like, don't put all of like high stress tasks on that week, you know what I mean? So
don't speak on panels, you know, for me that kind of stuff is super draining.
So it's like really working with the rhythms of life, and like in your environment, but also you personally.
That's true. Just to plug Flo App, we don't have them as an affiliate partner or anything. They're not a sponsor. But yeah, for women, like they literally let you know like when your ovulation is, when you're all
the things.
Yeah, you just know everything about your cycle, how you're going to be feeling, what you should eat to get energy. It's just good to be aware of your body. That's why taking care of yourself is so important.
Yeah.
As a creative person, to know like what times of the month am I lacking energy?
Yeah.
So you can just optimize really and work smarter, not always harder.
Yeah.
But yeah, to sum it up, whether you're in the inspiration mode or ideation or in like the fine-tuning mode of life or a literal creative project, being in tune with the Holy Spirit, being healthy spiritually, emotionally, mentally. And if you're in a really dark place, sometimes therapy or counseling is a good start.
Yeah.
To get out that creative block. A lot of creative blocks are stemmed from like something that's unaddressed internally. So it starts there. So yeah, I hope this helps some of you.
I wanted to talk a little bit about a couple of different catalysts for me, just because I just want to paint a picture of like sort of my creative life in the past and what I think it is now. We didn't talk about this too much because we're going to do a whole episode on like what's your why, but knowing your why and your sort of where you're called to is a big part of this, because you're able to know what opportunities are for you and what aligns with where God wants you and what your gifts are and things like that. And when we were in college and I was doing this collection, and I wanted I was trying to get into the space where I'm making more meaningful work, and I tried to attach this whole story about going from materially rich to spiritually rich, which is kind of a big topic in and of itself. That was a little ambitious. And like, I think because I didn't really know what that meant for me personally, it wasn't really translating into the clothing. And it was hard for me to tell that story or even articulate it to my teachers and stuff like that. And so, you know, even though I got a decent grade on it and the teacher liked it, I didn't like the project at all. I kind of hated it. I didn't like the process because I was just very confused, and, you know, I think
you were still experiencing it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's hard to like speak from a place that you haven't fully processed, you know, unless you're literally just showing process, which, you know, I had to submit my homework, so I couldn't do that. But whereas now it's like I know what I'm about, and that informs not only how I do my projects, but also just what projects I'm doing to begin with, you know?
Yeah.
Which is not fashion nowadays, because fashion to me doesn't have the depth that I need to talk about the things that I want to talk about. And going back to,
or you just don't feel led to do
I just don't feel led. And that's not to say that fashion
it can have depth.
It can have depth, but
if like God isn't leading you to do that, it's not going to have that power.
Yeah, that medium doesn't really work for me. Another thing that changed a lot about my creative lifestyle is that Cinderella production. Going back to that, because that was like a very clear leadership position where I have to delegate, and all these people are depending on me to, you know, make a budget, come through with a budget, both time-wise and money-wise. And I was still in this space of like, you know, grinding, you know, working well under stress, and just being really unrealistic about my physical needs and my mental needs, and not taking breaks. I also was working a full-time job, and I think it just hit home harder because, again, since so many people were depending on me, it was like I can't afford to sort of fall, you know. It's like, well, then we don't have a production, you know what I mean? I can't just go MIA. There's like there's like 8 people that really need me to come through, and I also can't afford to, you know, pass out, which is what happened basically. Like the night before, like our main rehearsal, and it's like, dude, we're too close to game time for me to be passing out and having like these physical issues. It's like we got to take care of ourselves. A concussion
or something.
Yeah. So I think those are big checkpoints for me where I'm like, okay, we got to change. We got to change up how we're doing this.
And God is good even in those areas to like let you see like you're not healthy, and like I want you to create beautiful things in this earth more than you do, but it's like I need you. I care about you more than the art. Yeah. So that's why creative health is so important, because He cares about our spirits, our souls even more. So so I hope this episode helps some of you who may have just been feeling stuck or just frustrated with their creative process. And please check out the pair episode.
Yes, definitely listen
to learn like the creative
process.
Yeah, and the more literal sense of like when you're actually working on a project.
Yeah. So I feel like ask questions because it kind of is an abstract thing to talk about.
Yeah, creative health.
Yeah.
So
definitely challenge us on that.
Yeah, we will answer your comments. Thank you.
All right. See you guys. Thanks for listening to today's episode, and special thanks for our show music by the band Rhythm.
Check the show notes in the description for information or links to anything we may have discussed in today's episode.
You can find us on Spotify, Instagram, YouTube, and iTunes, where you can give us a review.
Until next time.